When I returned home after months away, the walls I once called mine were empty, and strangers were moving in. My own brother had sold my house, laughing as if I was powerless to stop him. What he didn't know was that the land beneath that house was not just mine. It was protected federal property, and his betrayal had just signed his downfall. Thandika stepped out of the taxi with her suitcase in hand, her heart beating fast with excitement. Months of hard work abroad had finally ended, and all she wanted was to breathe the air of home again, to push open her door and feel the warmth of the walls that had raised her since childhood. But as she turned the corner, her smile froze. Her street was crowded with moving trucks, men carrying boxes, strangers walking in and out of her house like they owned it. The windows she used to clean with her mother's old cloth, the front door where her father once stood, now wide open and invaded. Her voice trembled as she asked one of the movers what was happening. But before he could answer, a familiar laugh pierced the air. Kosi, her younger brother, stepped forward, his hands in his pockets, his grin wide and sharp. "Surprise, sister," he said, tilting his head with pride. "I sold the house. Got a good deal too." The words hit Thandika like a heavy stone. She stared at him, waiting for a sign that this was some cruel joke. But Kosi's smirk only deepened as he pointed at the strangers lugging out furniture she had saved for. Chairs their parents once sat on. The dining table where birthdays were celebrated. "You were gone too long," he mocked. "Someone had to make use of it. And don't worry, the money is in safe hands, mine." Thandika's chest tightened, her suitcase slipping from her grip. This wasn't just a building. It was her parents' legacy, their laughter, their sweat, their history. Every brick had a memory, and Kosi had sold it all as if it were nothing but dust. She wanted to scream, but the shock left her breathless. Neighbors peeked from their doors, whispering, shaking their heads. Some pitied her, others avoided her eyes, but no one spoke up. And Kosi, drunk with his false victory, leaned close and whispered, "You were always too soft, Thandika. Too weak to fight. That's why I win." He walked away with that same smirk, leaving her standing in the middle of the street, the weight of betrayal heavier than her suitcase. The home she longed for was gone, replaced by strangers' footsteps and her brother's cruelty. But deep in her silence, something stronger than tears began to stir. This was not the end. It was only the beginning. Thandika stood frozen on the pavement, her eyes fixed on the house she once called home, but her mind drifted far away. Memories cut through her like blades, sharp and unrelenting. She saw herself years ago, barely out of her teens, holding a crying Kosi in her arms the night their parents were buried. She had whispered into his ear, promising that no matter how hard life became, she would protect him, feed him, and make sure he had the future their parents dreamed of. She remembered working double shifts, sometimes 3 jobs, coming home with aching feet and empty pockets, but still managing to put food on the table for him. When her friends chased their own dreams, she let hers fade away quietly so she could afford his school fees. She bought him books instead of buying herself clothes. She skipped meals so he could eat. Every sacrifice was a thread she wove into his success. And when he graduated, she was the loudest one clapping, tears of pride running down her cheeks, believing all her struggles had been worth it. But standing here now, looking at his smirk, those memories turned into knives piercing her chest. The very boy she had raised into a man now mocked her, throwing her sacrifices back into her face. Kosi leaned casually against the moving truck, arms crossed, his voice dripping with arrogance. "You always thought love could solve everything, didn't you?" he sneered. "That's why you're standing here with nothing while I walk away with everything. You were too soft, too weak to ever win." Each word was another wound, yet Thandika didn't answer. She simply stared at him, the sting of betrayal heavier than any insult. The neighbors watched silently, some remembering how she once carried Kosi on her back when he was sick, how she was the one who kept the family together after tragedy. But Kosi didn't care. In his eyes, kindness was foolishness, and loyalty was weakness. As the last of the furniture was loaded, he tossed one final glance at her, smirk still intact. "This world doesn't reward hearts, Thandika. It rewards power. And today power is mine." Thandika clenched her fists, not in anger, but in silent resolve. Betrayal had cut her deeply, but even a knife cannot stop a heart that refuses to die. This was no defeat. It was the spark of something greater. Thandika slowly stepped into the house, her shoes echoing against the bare floor. The rooms that once held warmth and laughter now stood hollow, stripped of life. Boxes and half-packed furniture sat awkwardly in corners, but it wasn't the emptiness of the space that crushed her. It was the silence, the kind that carried ghosts of the past. She walked into the living room, her eyes landing on the faded spot on the wall where their family portrait used to hang. She remembered her father's deep laugh the day it was taken, her mother's gentle hand resting on her shoulder, and Kosi grinning with mischief in his young eyes. That frame had been the anchor of the house, and now it was gone, just like them. Her chest tightened as she realized she wasn't just losing walls and bricks. She was losing the heartbeat of her family. Her footsteps led her to the kitchen, and suddenly she saw her mother again, stirring a pot of stew while humming softly, the smell of fresh bread filling the air. For a moment, Thandika swore she could hear it, the clatter of pots, the warmth of voices around the table, the sound of home. But when she blinked, all she saw was an empty counter, dust settling where love once lived. In the hallway, she stopped by the small crack on the wall. She remembered how it happened. Kosi had been playing soccer inside the house, kicked the ball too hard, and left that mark. Their father had laughed, calling it the family's first battle scar, and promised to never fix it, saying it gave the house character. Now staring at it, Thandika's tears spilled freely. To her, that crack was priceless. It was memory carved into stone. To Kosi, it had been nothing but an obstacle to selling faster. As she stood in her childhood bedroom, stripped bare of curtains and furniture, the reality hit her harder than ever. Kosi hadn't just sold a house. He had sold their parents' dream, their sacrifices, their blood and sweat. He had put a price tag on their history, on everything that made them a family. Thandika's hand brushed against the wall, her tears falling onto the floor. This wasn't just betrayal, it was a burial. And the grave wasn't for the house, but for the legacy that was supposed to live on. The family gathering was supposed to be a place of unity, but that night it turned into a stage for Kosi's arrogance. He walked into the room dressed in his finest clothes, his voice loud enough to command attention. With a glass of wine in hand, he laughed as he told everyone how he had sold that old house, and made more money than any of them would see in a year. His words were sharp, each one meant to remind Thandika of what he had taken. Cousins leaned closer to whisper, some shaking their heads in pity, others nodding as if they secretly admired his boldness. A few even chuckled nervously at his cruel jokes, too afraid to stand against him. Every mention of the money felt like a knife twisting deeper into Thandika's chest. He called her soft, said she was too weak to handle real business, and bragged about how he was the true leader of the family now. His voice dripped with mockery, and his smile was soaked in pride. Thandika sat quietly at the corner of the table, her hands folded on her lap. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was control. But no one in that room could see it. To them, her calm face looked like surrender, as if she had accepted defeat. Whispers floated through the air, stinging her ears. She should have fought harder. Maybe Kosi was right. Maybe she really isn't strong enough. Boasting louder, Kosi slammed his hand on the table and said, "This family should be thanking me. I turned an old, useless house into fortune. Meanwhile, some people here can't even pay their bills." His eyes flicked toward Thandika, the room following his gaze. Laughter broke out, though uneasy, and Thandika felt every chuckle press against her heart like weight. But while everyone saw a sister too broken to fight, Thandika's mind was far from broken. Behind her silence, her thoughts were steady, her resolve building like fire beneath ashes. She watched Kosi gloat, watched her relatives nod along, and she made no move to defend herself. She didn't need to, not yet, for in that moment, her silence wasn't defeat. It was a storm waiting for the perfect time to break, and when it did, Kosi's laughter would be the very first sound it swallowed whole. Thandika left the family gathering with her heart heavy but her mind sharper than ever. She knew there had to be more to the story, something her brother didn't understand. The next morning, she went to see Mr. Molef, a government officer who had once been close to her late father. His office was filled with old books, maps, and framed certificates. The moment he saw her, his expression softened with recognition. "My child," he said gently. "I was expecting you one day." His words confused her, but as they sat down, he pulled out a dusty file from a locked cabinet. Inside were documents bearing her father's name, the family property clearly listed. Thandika's eyes widened as Mr. Molef explained the truth she had never known. The house her brother sold wasn't just a house. Years ago, her father had registered it under federal heritage protection because of its historical importance. It stood on land tied to their ancestors' legacy. Her heart raced as she listened. Mr. Molef leaned forward, lowering his voice. Do you understand what this means, Thandika? The sale your brother made is completely illegal. No one can buy or sell this land. By trying, Kosi has trapped himself. He didn't just steal from you, he committed fraud against the state. Thandika sat frozen, the weight of his words sinking in. For days, she had felt powerless, betrayed by the person she trusted most. But now everything shifted. Her brother's arrogance had blinded him, and in his greed he had written his own downfall. She didn't need to scream or beg for justice. The law itself was on her side. Mr. Molef placed the stamped documents into her hands, his eyes firm with reassurance. Your father trusted me to protect this heritage. But now it's your duty. You are the rightful guardian of that home. Don't let anyone take it from you. Thandika clutched the papers close to her chest. Her tears were no longer from pain but from relief and a burning sense of justice. For the first time since her return, she stood up straighter. The storm her silence had been hiding was ready. And Kosi had no idea that the walls he thought he had sold still belonged, forever, to her. Thandika returned to her small temporary apartment with the documents pressed tightly against her chest. Her heart was steady, not racing with anger anymore, but beating with a new kind of strength. She knew she had the truth, but she also knew timing was everything. If she confronted Kosi too soon, he would twist her words, mock her, and make her look desperate in front of the family. No. She needed to let him feel comfortable, proud, untouchable. She needed him to believe he had already won. So she stayed silent. She walked through the days with a calm face, almost peaceful, while inside she was quietly preparing her storm. Whenever Kosi called her to brag about the money he was spending, she simply replied with soft words, never raising her voice. He laughed at her silence, thinking it was weakness, but she smiled privately, knowing it was the weapon he could never see coming. At night, Thandika spread the legal papers across her table, the stamped documents from Mr. Molef glinting under the lamp. She studied every detail, every law, every signature. She wasn't just going to protect her father's home. She was going to expose her brother's betrayal for what it truly was. With every page she turned, her confidence grew stronger. Meanwhile, Kosi paraded through the neighborhood, waving money around, throwing loud parties, and bragging that he was now a successful man. People clapped for him, praised him, even envied him. And all the while, Thandika walked quietly in the shadows, her silence wrapping around him like a rope he didn't even know was tightening. The neighbors whispered about her calmness. Some said she had given up. Others pitied her for being too gentle to fight back. But Thandika didn't explain herself. She didn't need to. The truth didn't need shouting. It only needed the right moment to be revealed. And so she waited, patient, strong, and unshaken. She knew storms don't announce themselves with noise. They gather in silence, heavy with power, until the sky finally cracks open. And when it did, Kosi would learn that the sister he thought was powerless had been building thunder right behind her quiet smile. The knock on Thandika's door wasn't gentle. It was loud, angry, and impatient. Before she could even answer, Kosi shoved it open and stormed inside, the smell of alcohol and arrogance trailing behind him. In his hand, he waved a thick roll of cash like it was a trophy. His laugh filled the small apartment as he tossed the money onto her table, the notes scattering across her legal papers. Look at me now, little sister, he sneered, puffing out his chest. All this money because I was smart enough to sell that old house. And you? Still sitting here like a poor, forgotten nobody. You should be thanking me. I turned our father's useless legacy into gold. Thandika didn't flinch. She didn't rush to gather the papers he had just covered with his arrogance. She simply sat back in her chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes calm and steady. The silence stretched, and for the first time, Kosi's grin twitched, almost uncertain. Finally she spoke, her voice steady and unshaken. Kosi, she said softly, you didn't sell a house, you sold a crime. The room went still. He blinked at her, then burst into mocking laughter, clapping his hands dramatically. A crime? Please, Thandika. Stop trying to scare me. I sold it, I got paid. And there's nothing you can do about it. You think anyone will listen to you? You're too soft, too quiet. But even as he laughed, her words clung to him like shadows he couldn't shake. Thandika leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. There was no anger in her gaze, only a calm strength that unsettled him far more than any shouting would have. You don't even realize what you've done, she whispered. The land you sold isn't ordinary land. It's protected by law. Every paper you signed, every coin you took, every lie you told, it's all evidence. You haven't just betrayed me, Kosi. You've betrayed the law itself, and the law is coming for you. For the first time, Kosi's laughter cracked. His hand, once waving money with pride, trembled slightly. He tried to brush it off, forcing another laugh, but her calmness was louder than his arrogance. In that moment, he saw something in Thandika he had never seen before. The quiet certainty of a woman who held the storm in her hands. The neighborhood hall buzzed with chatter, the kind that carried both excitement and curiosity. Kosi had called for a community meeting, strutting in like a man who owned the world. He wore a brand new suit, gold watch gleaming under the lights, his smile wide and arrogant. Standing at the front, he raised his hands for silence and began to boast about his great achievement. He spoke of how he had turned a dusty old family home into wealth, how his cleverness had brought him fortune, and how others should learn from his example. Laughter and uneasy claps followed, though many people exchanged doubtful looks. Just as he was reaching the peak of his arrogance, the back doors of the hall swung open. Heads turned as Thandika walked in, her steps calm and deliberate, her posture tall. But she wasn't alone. Behind her, in their sharp uniforms, stood two federal officers carrying files and official documents. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Whispers spread like wildfire, and Kosi's confident smile faltered for just a moment before he forced it back. What is this? He scoffed, trying to sound unbothered. My little sister crashing my celebration? You must really be desperate for attention. His laugh echoed awkwardly, but the room had already gone silent. Thandika didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She stood in the center, her presence commanding without effort. One of the officers stepped forward, holding up a stamped document. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced firmly, we are here to declare that the recent sale of the Makona property is void. The land in question is protected under federal heritage law. The so-called sale was illegal. Gasps erupted from the crowd. All eyes shot back to Kosi, whose face drained of color. He stammered, shaking his head. No, that can't be true. I had the papers. The second officer spoke, his tone sharp as steel. Those papers were forged, and money was exchanged under false pretenses. Kosi Makona, you are under investigation for fraud. The room exploded in murmurs, people pointing, shaking their heads in disgust. Kosi's hands trembled as he tried to protest, but the sight of the federal badge silenced him. Thandika stood still, her calm eyes watching him unravel. For the first time, his power wasn't just slipping, it was gone. The same crowd that once admired him now looked at him with shame and disbelief, while his sister's quiet strength filled the room like thunder no one could escape. The sound of metal clicking echoed through the hall as the officers pulled Kosi's arms behind his back. The proud, boastful man who had strutted moments ago now looked small, cornered, and terrified. The handcuffs snapped shut, and with them his arrogance shattered. His head jerked up, searching the faces around him, but there was no admiration left. The very neighbors who had once clapped for his so-called success now whispered with disgust, shaking their heads. Mothers pulled their children closer. Men who had once envied him now muttered words like shame and betrayal. Kosi's face turned pale, sweat beading on his forehead. He stumbled as the officers held him. No longer the powerful figure he imagined himself to be, but a broken man caught in the truth. His eyes darted desperately toward Thandika. For the first time, there was no mockery in his gaze, only fear. His voice cracked as he pleaded, Thandika, please, you can stop this. Tell them it was a mistake. You're my sister, you wouldn't let them take me like this. Thandika stood tall, her calmness a shield he could not penetrate. She stepped forward slowly, her eyes fixed on him with a mixture of sorrow and strength. The room hushed, every ear waiting for her response. She bent slightly so he could hear her words clearly, but she didn't whisper. Her voice was soft yet carried enough weight to silence the entire hall. A brother protects family, she said firmly. her eyes glistening but unbroken. Not sells it. The words struck harder than the handcuffs. Kosi's knees buckled, and his shoulders slumped as though all the pride he carried had been ripped away. He tried to speak again, but nothing came out, just the trembling breath of a man who had finally realized the depth of his betrayal. The officers began to lead him out, his feet dragging as the crowd parted, their stares burning into him like fire. Some muttered prayers for Thandika's strength, others shook their heads at the disgrace. For Kosi, every step toward the door felt like a lifetime, the weight of his choices heavier than the chains on his wrists. Thandika didn't look away. She stood still, watching as her brother disappeared from the hall, knowing that this was not just his fall, but the moment her dignity rose above everything he had tried to take from her. The day the house was finally restored to her name, Thandika stood at the gate for a long moment, just breathing it in. The moving trucks were gone. The noise of strangers had vanished, and all that remained was the quiet dignity of the home her parents once built with love. Neighbors who had once pitied her now lined the street, some smiling warmly, others clapping softly as if welcoming back a queen to her rightful throne. For the first time in months, respect replaced whispers, and admiration replaced doubt. She stepped slowly across the yard, her footsteps heavy with memory. The front door creaked open, and she walked inside. Each room carried a familiar scent, a mixture of old wood and memories. The silence was no longer empty. It was full, alive with the voices of her past. She ran her fingers along the wall, her touch lingering on the very surface where her father once hung family photos. A tear slid down her cheek, but this time it wasn't from pain. It was relief. It was triumph. Standing in the middle of the living room, she closed her eyes and whispered softly, as if her parents were standing right beside her. They tried to steal our legacy, she said, her voice steady. But it was never for sale. The words echoed through the house like a prayer, a vow, and a victory all in one. Outside, the neighbors waited patiently, some calling her name with pride. Children waved, women nodded in respect, men stood tall as if honoring her strength. She walked back out onto the porch, her shoulders squared, her dignity shining brighter than ever before. She didn't need to boast, didn't need to gloat. Her silence spoke louder than any victory speech ever could. And then the narration closed, wrapping her journey in a truth so powerful it could not be broken. Betrayal may sell the bricks, but it can never own the foundation of truth. The camera lingered on her face, her eyes lifted toward the sky, and the screen faded, leaving the audience not just with her story, but with a reminder that no matter how deep betrayal cuts, truth always has the final word. If this story touched you, don't let it stop here. Broken heart, right arrow, flexed biceps. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that truth always wins. Comment below what part hit you the hardest, and follow for more powerful stories that prove, no matter the betrayal, dignity and justice will always rise.